Hello again and welcome to episode 4 of the Boneyard. As I stated in the previous episode, I will be taking on the subject of the mainstream media. I've done a lot of thinking about how I want to present this topic to you, and still, quite frankly, at the time of this initial writing, I'm not sure how I'm going to go about doing this. It is a vast topic, and there are so many bases to cover that I know for a fact that I will leave out some of it. But I will do my best to not miss any of the truly important bits and will cover as much as I can. First off, let me state that in the weeks prior to me putting pen to paper on this topic, yes, I still use those arcane relics when forming thoughts. In the weeks prior, I've gone through hours of news footage and documentary films on the subject of mainstream media. Even though I already had a basic idea of what the mainstream media is and has always been about, I've learned much more about it in putting this presentation together. It's one of the deepest, darkest, twisted offshoots of the rabbit hole in existence, and I am still traversing these obfuscated tunnels in an effort to try to sort things out. I've said it before, and I will again stress the point here. The Boneyard is as much about informing myself as it is about informing you.
Hidden power structure of international finance has exerted tremendous influence over public opinion in this country through its virtual control of higher education and major segments of mass communications. The human mind is like a computer. No matter how efficient it may be, its reliability is only as great as the information fed into it. If it is possible to control the input of the human mind, then no matter how intelligent a person may be, it's entirely possible to program what he will think.
I suppose that I should go ahead and just start at the beginning. At least the beginning insofar as what we're looking at regarding mainstream media. Since the time of the ancient Egyptians, and even further back, the elites have always used imagery and pageantry to hold sway over the masses. They built temples, tombs, towers, and all sorts of other overbearing monstrosities whose sole purpose was to let the masses know exactly who was in charge, and changed history as they saw fit. History is written by the victors is not just some saying. It's absolute truth.
A prolific builder, Tutmosis III was also a determined destroyer. Within 20 years of Queen Hatshepsut's death, he and an army of followers descended upon everything that bore her name or likeness and destroyed it.
And it continues to this day. Overbearing monstrosities whose sole purpose is to let you know exactly who is in charge. And at their disposal, the elites have the greatest, most overbearing monstrosity of all time, the mainstream media, also known as the mass media, and even the corporate mass media. Everybody has heard it coined as such, but it seems that very few actually intimate the true meaning of this, and certainly have no clue of what the implications of this are. Let's start with why the mainstream media is the corporate mass media. Back in 1917, J.P. Morgan interests hired 12 executive news managers and asked them to, quote, determine the most influential newspapers in America. And then they were asked to figure out how many of these news organizations needed to be bought in order to control generally the policy of the daily press of the United States. They found that they would only have to purchase the control of 25 of the greatest papers. J.P. Morgan interests then went about purchasing the policies of these news organizations and placed an editor at each newspaper to ensure that all published information was in keeping with their policies. Today, the Council on Foreign Relations, or CFR, has controlled most all of mainstream media. They state that their goal is to increase America's understanding of the world. But this, of course, is a lie. From the insiders themselves, these people aim to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each and every country and the economy of the world as a whole. And what better way for them to push whatever ideas they want to push into the heads of the masses than corporate-controlled mass media? The elites have always controlled the mainstream media and have done so for this purpose alone. And it will continue until it is realized by the masses that the mainstream media is nothing but a tool of propaganda set up by the elites to feed their lies to the people. Sure, there is a sprinkling of truth in there, just enough to make the whole thing seem open, honest, and unbiased. But it is anything but that. For the most part, the things that they focus your attention on are meaningless, put there simply to distract you from what's really going on. Let's take these recent events or revelations of the Fast and Furious, Benghazi, NSA, and IRS scandals. Now, I'm not saying that these scandals are meaningless, but there is somebody else who is implying them as such.
With this endless parade of distractions and political posturing and phony scandals, Washington's taken its eye off the ball. And I'm here to say this needs to stop. Phony scandals, phony scandal, phony
Sure,
scandal.
we see a bit of this news on TV, but what seems to really be filling my screen at the time of this writing is the Anthony Weiner scandal. I guess that this is a true scandal as opposed to a phony scandal. In any case, all of these scandals just go to help the cause of the elites in being able to keep their agendas hidden. The mainstream media carries just a very few ongoing major stories filling up their time to distract us further. Historically, these stories are about film stars, TV stars, politicians, sports figures, people considered celebrities in general. The masses eat this crap up because these stories show faults in people who are otherwise perceived as perfect. Even though this simple fact is known, the people love to see it and just can't avert their eyes from another train wreck. And when the mainstream media gets a hold of a story that they can spin for some elitist agenda, it's heaven for them. They can force whatever they like into that brain of yours, and it's stuck there, unerasable. The best you can hope to do is to correct it with the truth. Here is what NBC pushed into the heads of the masses during the Trayvon Martin-George Zimmerman fiasco. Yes, a tragedy for sure, but a fiasco nonetheless.
This guy looks like he's up to no good. He looks black.
Did you see what he was wearing?
Yeah, a dark hoodie.
Now, the imagery brought forth here cannot be erased from your mind. No matter how hard you try, it will not go away. Like I said, though, you can correct the image with the truth.
This guy looks like he's up to no good, or he's on drugs or something. It's raining, and he's just walking around looking about.
Okay, and this guy, is he white, black, or Hispanic?
He looks black.
Just a little different in contextual meaning, I would say. This is another major tactic of the mainstream media, pitting everyone against each other over things that in the greater view don't mean a damn thing.
They essentially have a society that bickers over issues that have no real importance on the real power of the world. They use hot-button, emotional issues like abortion or gays in the military to divide and conquer us, while they laugh all the way to the bank, march us off to the war, and destroy our Constitution.
Now, to balance the scale, I'd like to talk about some things that bring us together. Things that point out our similarities instead of our differences. Because that's all you ever hear about in this country is our differences. That's all the media and the politicians are ever talking about, the things that separate us, things that make us different from one another. That's the way the ruling class operates in any society. They try to divide the rest of the people. They keep the lower and the middle classes fighting with each other so that they, the rich, can run off with all the fucking money. Fairly simple thing, happens to work. You know, anything different, that's what they're going to talk about. Race, religion, ethnic and national background, jobs, income, education, social status, sexuality, anything they can do, keep us fighting with each other so that they can keep going to the bank.
They set everyone against everybody else by filling our minds with trivialities so that we have no time to really worry about the elites and what their agendas are. We are too busy worrying about this race or that religion or which politician to vote for. And beyond pitting everyone against each other, it seems a more recent ploy of the mainstream media here in the United States is to push an anti-family agenda deep into your skull, pushing the idea that your children are not yours, but instead the community's. This tactic has been used by the elites forever. Break up the family. I am forced to believe that Mr. Obama feels the same way, as he surely feels that way about businesses and his thoughts that you didn't create that, you had help. It seems that this theme is continuing with the following.
We have never invested as much in public education as we should have because we've always had kind of a private notion of children. Your kid is yours and totally your responsibility. We haven't had a very collective notion of these are our children. So part of it is we have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families and recognize that kids belong to whole communities. Once it's everybody's responsibility and not just the households, then we start making better investments.
And of course, all of the shows on TV portraying purely dysfunctional families, helpless sheeple, and incompetent fathers. The family is the thing that they are trying to conquer in order to fully implement their plans. And it has been going on in the good old US of A for a long time now. And it all starts with first the parents throwing their children in front of that grand old babysitter, the television set, and it continues onward when they start their education. It should not be called education, but instead simply remembering lists and remembering to stay in line. And when you aren't focusing on everything that I have mentioned so far, they make damn sure to give us something else to worry about.
In his book, The Status Seekers, Vance Packard uses the phrase merchants of discontent to describe a deliberate strategy by advertisers of targeting the less affluent with status symbol messages. For someone with little chance of changing their social conditions in life, consumerism offers a quick fix that allows people to feel as though they are climbing the social hierarchy, when in fact, they are standing still. The strategy was particularly evident in mid-century automobile advertising. Studies found the people who lived in housing developments were more likely to park their cars outside of the garage than those who could afford more expensive homes. A typical example is this advertisement from Plymouth. It reads, "We're not wealthy, we just look it." The American way of life would be characterized by a myth which would seem to make political activism unnecessary. In the new democracy of material goods, there were an infinite number of possessions to be purchased by rich and poor alike. There was no need to change institutions because the system was already perfect. It was called the American Dream, and happiness was just one possession away.
Quality, values, style, service, selection, convenience, economy, savings, performance, experience, hospitality, low rates, friendly service, name brands, easy terms, affordable prices, money-back guarantee, free installation. Free admission, free appraisal, free alterations, free delivery, free estimates, free home trial, and free parking. No cash? No problem. No kidding. No fuss, no muss, no risk, no obligation, no red tape, no hidden charges, no down payment, no entry fee, no purchase necessary, no one will call on you, no payments or interest till December, and no parking. Limited time only, though, so act now, order today, send no money, offer good while supplies last, 2 to a customer, each item sold separately, batteries not included, mileage may vary. All sales are final, allow 6 weeks for delivery, some items not available, some assembly required, some restrictions may apply. Shop by mail, order by phone. Try it in your home, get one for your car. All entries become our property. Employees not eligible, entry fees not refundable. Local restrictions apply. Void where prohibited, except in Indiana. So come on in for a free demonstration and a free consultation with our friendly professional staff. Our courteous and knowledgeable sales representatives will help you make a selection that's just right for you and just right for your budget. And say, don't forget to pick up your free gift. A classic, deluxe, custom, designer, luxury, prestige, high quality, premium, select, gourmet pocket flashlight. And if you act now, we'll include an extra added free complimentary bonus gift, a classic, deluxe, custom, designer, luxury, prestige, high-quality, premium, select, gourmet, leather-style wallet with detachable keychain and a pencil holder. It's our way of saying thank you. And if you're not completely satisfied, you pay nothing. Simply return the unused portion for a full refund, no questions asked. It's our way of saying thank you. Keep your free gift. Actually, it's our way of saying bend over just a little further.
The powers that be use the mainstream media to use you, and they do it so well, so effectively, so as to keep you blind to the fact that they are doing it at all, and all the while doing it right in front of your face and laughing the whole time.
The bottom line is that the government is getting what they have ordered. They do not want your children to be educated. They do not want you to think too much. That is why our country and our world has become so proliferated with entertainments, mass media, television shows, amusement parks, drugs, alcohol, and every kind of entertainment to keep the human mind entertained, so that you don't get in the way of important people by doing too much thinking. You had better wake up and understand that there are people who are guiding you and know it.
No, indeed. We wouldn't want you doing anything as silly as actually thinking for yourself. Wouldn't want you to do anything as rash as asking questions. The mainstream media will tell you everything that you need to know, and further it by telling you to not look anywhere else for answers. The alternative media, however, insists that you go look. There is another institution which adopts this "you will do things this way and like it" creed, the institution of compulsory state education. But that is for another episode entirely. I'll only mention it here to further inform you of how your brain has been controlled for you since birth, and your brain will remain controlled until your death, unless you wake up. If I haven't pushed across enough the point that the mainstream is a tool of the elites and their agendas, let me tell you what David Rockefeller said back in 1991, and again I quote, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other publications, whose directors have attended our meetings and respected our policies of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we'd been subject to the bright lights of publicity, but the world is a much more sophisticated place and prepared to march toward a world government."
A basic objective of the insiders, and has been from the beginning, has been to break the will to resist, to convince through their propaganda that there's no hope, that it's inevitable, that moving towards a one-world government, a one-world court system, a one-world military, a one-world currency, all of that is just inevitable. And they present it in a way that, again, convinces, they try to convince that the momentum is so great that it cannot be stopped.
A world government sounds more like it's just a pleasanter way of saying that they want less and less people controlling the whole thing at the top. And if you don't know what that concept is called, let me give you a little bit of help. It's called tyranny. And speaking further to this thought process, what gives any person the right to have control or authority over another person? If you look, you can see how they have always pushed for this idea of only a few particular people at the top, and they make damn sure to get in there whoever will play ball with them, with the help of the mainstream media. When you vote for politicians, whose choice is it that is actually being made? If you think that the choice is yours, you are absolutely wrong. Ultimately, you have chosen somebody that the elites have thrown out there for you to pick. It's kind of stacked like this. Let's say that I have a deck of cards and I tell you to pick out an ace. But from this deck, I choose 2 cards for you to pick from. Now, with me being the owner of the deck, I make the rules and manipulate them as I see fit. I don't want you to pick an ace, so neither of the cards I give you to pick from are an ace. In fact, it's in my best interest that you pick a joker. So those are the 2 cards that I give you to choose from. Would you play a ridiculous game such as this? Of course not. You should take this same tact with the whole fraudulent voting system and just not play their silly little game. Because in the end, there are no aces, only the jokers that they throw out there for you. Here's a small example of how mainstream media is used to these ends.
Before Clinton was shooed into office, he had to compete against a host of other Democratic candidates. The media focused on 4 of these candidates, but Larry Agron was a 5th candidate the press did not report on.
There's no makeup here?
During the 1992 U.S. Conference of Mayors, the New York Times reported that, quote, "Dozens of mayors seem to agree on one thing. The single candidate who truly understands urban needs is Larry Agron," unquote.
They promised to bring this stuff over.
None of the networks mentioned Agron's presence at the convention.
I thought if I run over that super circuit.
One of Agron's staff had to run over to the Super Saver and buy some makeup because the network had broken its promise to provide it. This was typical of the media's treatment of Agron. When he appeared at this Democratic Candidates Forum, this Associated Press photo simply cropped Agron out of the frame. During the New Hampshire primary, the TV news reported the polling numbers of the top 5 Democratic candidates: Brown, Clinton, Harkin, Kerry, and Tsongas. When Agron moved into a three-way tie with Harkin and Brown with 2% of the vote, most of the TV news didn't mention Agron. The day Bill Clinton captured what may have been the most valuable airtime of the entire election, as he spoke to 50 million viewers about his alleged affair, was the same day that a poll showed Agron's support at 4%. He had passed Brown and was the 5th leading candidate. When ABC's Sunday Evening News reported this poll, they simply deleted Agron entirely by not reporting his candidacy. During the New Hampshire primary, Agron's only live commercial TV appearance was through this satellite feed to ABC's Nightline. But the Nightline program wasn't directly about the election. When Agron complained to news executives about his lack of coverage, he was told he had not earned the right to media exposure because he had not received enough media exposure.
And on stage, the 5 major contenders for the Democratic presidential nomination.
Although Agron was on the ballot in nearly half the country, he was barred from most televised debates, including this one sponsored by the League of Women Voters. He couldn't meet one of the League's main criteria, which was, quote, recognition by the national media as a candidate meriting media attention. Without media exposure and the debates, Agron couldn't quickly receive federal campaign funds, and his candidacy lost momentum. The Democratic Party refused to include Agron in the debates or speak to the networks on his behalf. Agron talked about his exclusion, saying, "I've challenged my own party for its continuing complicity in Cold War thinking, Cold War rhetoric, and Cold War budgets."
But I believe in objective news. I believe in balanced news. I don't want to slant the news. I just want to tell it like it is.
I have sent word to keep that Operation Rescue. I don't want one word on this program this week about Operation Rescue.
Well, we're not. We're not.
I don't want to cover it. I don't want to talk about it. And I want you to do it.
But I believe in objective news. I believe in balanced news. I don't want to slant the news. I just want to tell it like it is.
And stuff. I mean, we felt like we should cover it as in.
Don't cover anything about the abortion debate any longer. It doesn't matter. They passed the platform. We need to get cameras covering our rally, our
Oh, we're there. We're going to be there.
And
Does it start?
and then you need cameras
It's crunch
shooting
time for President George Bush.
or me sitting in the vice president's spot. Various things.
We can have see this.
Both.
Both.
5 minutes before.
How many cameras?
We have just
Camera crews.
We have 2 here.
You get 2 reporters, and you stick those cameras in the face of anybody you want to, and start asking a question.
Hey,
You
Lou.
want to ask a tough question, ask a
And let
tough
them
question.
know
Don't be
right now
nice.
we haven't seen
You know? I mean, get out there. Don't even say who you're from.
If he doesn't show, then we'll just go from the
What do you think is the president
here.
of Texas? You think this thing is there might be a military gimmick? You think that's election? I mean,
And then Pat will discuss with them
you know what I'm saying? I mean, and the camera right in their face. Go up and ask you a question. Boom.
We'll do it. We'll do it.
We play hardball. We play hardball.
I'm not sure at that point it's going to make a whole lot.
I don't want to slant the news. I don't want to slant the news. I don't want to slant the news. I just want to tell it like it is.
And the mainstream media is twisted in areas beyond the realm of politics. For example,
Dateline NBC, a primetime news program, airs a story in 1992 entitled Waiting to Explode. The story includes footage demonstrating that a line of trucks produced by General Motors readily explode on impact.
To see for ourselves what might happen in a side impact crash, Dateline NBC hired the Institute for Safety Analysis to conduct crash demonstrations. Unlike GM tests, the fuel tanks were filled with real gasoline. Look what happened. At impact, a small hole was punctured in the tank. According to our experts, the pressure of the collision and the crushing of the gas tank forced gasoline to spew from the gas cap. The fuel then erupted into flames when ignited by the impacting car's headlight.
After the program airs, one of the firemen at the taping of the crash contacts GM. The conversation inspires a full-scale investigation. 3 months later, NBC is forced to reveal their role in fabricating the news.
NBC's contractor did put incendiary devices under the trucks to ensure that there would be a fire if gasoline were released from the truck's gas tank.
We said the crash, quote, forced gasoline to spew from the fuel cap, end quote. GM says since the gas cap was the wrong cap for the GM filler tube, and because the gas tank was overfilled, the cap came off when the impact occurred.
We agree with GM that we should have told our viewers about these devices.
The Dateline reporter, however, said, quote, at impact, a small hole was punctured in the tank, unquote. GM has now x-rayed that tank and found no hole.
We acknowledge the placing of the incendiary devices under the truck was a bad idea from start to finish.
That's our new policy, and we'll be right back.
Of course, everyone knows the old rhyme. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. We know his voyage took him to the New World, and his arrival changed the world forever. But beyond that, much about Columbus remains the subject of some dispute.
During the celebration of the 500th anniversary of Columbus's discovery of the Americas, the only satellite feed I found with a Native American guest was this feed to a local morning talk show. The guest is a historian and a member of the Cherokee Nation.
As you said, he presided over death of 250,000 people. No, that wasn't at his own hand. That was others who followed him and disease and that sort of thing.
No,
he couldn't control.
I'm talking about like his first 2 years here, 250,000. It's pretty well documented. He took his interpreters, he took his guides as slaves. He chopped off the hands of anyone over 14, any male over 14 who couldn't bring him gold. He took women as sex slaves for his men.
Dr. Matei, I want to thank you very much for coming by. Thanks for spending some time with us this morning on the Good Morning Show.
You're welcome. That was brief.
Okay. Hopefully painless, sir.
The painful lessons of Columbus's past were never mentioned as the networks debated his legacy.
Interesting debate. I'm not sure we settled it this morning, but we appreciate trying. That's true. Thank you both.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with more of our special edition of Today on Governor's Island right after this.
What did he say that made any sense? Anything?
They just, think that he ruined the paradise and had no respect for nature and treated the Indians like dog do and...
What the hell is he doing?
Okay.
Now, this interview never aired. As with many of the other clips used here, it was recorded from raw satellite feeds back in the 90s. The mainstream media will also fill your head with meaningless and simply useless BS, oftentimes pushing their stories out through all of their media outlets, making sure that everybody gets the exact same message, or brainwashing.
Could this be the end of email overload?
Could this be the end of email overload?
Could this be the end of email overload?
Could this be the end of email overload? Could this be the end of email overload? Could this be the end of email overload? Could this be the end of email overload?
Could this be the end of email overload?
Could this be the end of email overload? Could this be the end of email overload? Could this be the end of email overload?
Could this be the end of email overload?
Could this be the end to email overload?
Could this be the end of email overload?
Could this be the end of email overload?
I scream, you scream, you know the rest.
I scream, you scream, you know the rest. I scream, you scream, you know the rest. I scream, you scream, you know the rest. I scream, you scream, we all know the rest. I scream, you scream, you know the rest.
I scream, you scream, well, you know the rest. Final days of the campaign sometimes can get a little salty.
Final days of the campaign can get a little salt.
The final days of the campaign can get a little salt.
The final days of the campaign can get a little salt. The final days of the campaign have been, well, you might call them just a little salt.
Ridiculous. I could have included a lot more of this nonsense, but you get the point, I think. So, When exactly do we have the time to actually concern ourselves with what's truly important to us and our souls? When all of the time we're constantly worrying about all this other bullshit. Until you wake up and stop concerning yourself with this BS that they force feed to you, you won't have the time. And that's exactly how the elites want it. Keep you in your place and out of the way of their plans. Keep you distracted. And most of all, keeping you entertained. Well, I hope that you're enjoying that Kool-Aid, because that entertainment is not only costing you your rights inherent to every human being on this planet, it is also costing you your security, the very thing that they claim to be the reasoning behind all of these infringements on our Constitution. If you fall for the system's trap and strive for material possessions, status, and power, it's an endless struggle to gain and maintain these things, leaving absolutely no room for what's truly important to you. Again, exactly how the elites want it. Go fetch your treats, little ones. An endless struggle, because you will always need more and more, and there will always be those who will gladly take your money, gladly take your status, and gladly leave you with no power at all. We've all seen it happen so many times to so many others, and most likely you've already had an experience in this regard personally. These things are all illusions that the mainstream media has put there for you anyway, and you need to realize that this is all they are, illusions. However, once truth is known and freedom is truly gained, and as long as you fight to keep them, they can never be taken from you. If I'm going to have to be in a constant struggle for something, let it be for something impossible to take away from me, and let it not be for some illusion of who I should be, how I should act, what I should own, how I should look, who I should associate with, who I should love or hate, or any number of other illusions the mainstream media would have me believe. I've said it before and I will say it again. Use the mainstream media only as a tool to see what the elites are trying to push into your head, and then go one step further and realize why they are pushing these things into your head. Why is it so important for them to sell you on something that should be of absolutely no import to you? I'm Terry Wayne George, and again, thank you for watching The Boneyard. And remember, if you don't concern yourself with your own freedom and liberty, then there are those who will certainly and happily take it from you.